There are moments when the mind chooses before we even realize a choice has been made. You may think you are simply looking at images, comparing shapes, colors, or familiar forms. Yet something quieter often moves first. Something older than reasoning and much faster than language. Before you explain why one creature feels more interesting than another, your attention has already leaned in a particular direction, and that first movement can sometimes reveal more than deliberate thought ever could. Most people imagine that preference begins with logic, but many inner responses appear long before conscious explanation arrives. A person sees several symbols, several faces, several objects, and one of them seems to pull slightly harder, almost as if it carries a hidden signal meant only for that moment. The strange part is that this attraction often happens instantly. You do not decide to feel drawn toward it. You simply notice that your eyes return there first. That first reaction may reflect something active beneath the surface right now. A need, a tension, a memory, a desire for change, a search for steadiness, or even a part of yourself that has been quiet for too long. Not because a symbol contains magical truth, but because the mind naturally recognizes patterns that resonate with current inner experience. Sometimes what attracts us feels familiar. Sometimes it reflects what we are missing. Sometimes it mirrors a quality we are trying to strengthen without fully noticing it. For centuries, small creatures have appeared in stories, dreams, and personal reflection as symbols of adaptation, instinct, survival, and transformation. They live close to the ground, respond quickly to their environment, and move according to patterns that often seem simple from the outside, yet highly precise underneath. Because of that, people have long projected meaning onto them, seeing in their movements echoes of human emotional habits and inner ways of navigating life. This exercise is not about proving who you are. It is not a diagnosis, not a label, and not a fixed definition of personality. It is simply a reflective moment, a way to observe which image seems to speak first before analysis begins. Sometimes that first silent preference can open an unexpected door, because what catches attention often carries a subtle emotional tone that words have not yet formed. And the interesting part is this. Even before you consciously decide, some part of you may already know which image feels impossible to ignore. In a moment, you will look at 4 insects. They may seem simple at first, just familiar creatures with different shapes, movements, and associations. Yet each one carries a very different emotional atmosphere. Without needing words, each can suggest a distinct way of responding to life. One moves through change, one persists through pressure, one waits with precision, and one works through direction and collective rhythm. What makes this interesting is that people are rarely drawn for random reasons alone. Even when 2 images appear equally ordinary, attention often settles where something internal recognizes a tone that feels relevant now. That relevance may not describe your entire personality. It may instead reflect what is currently strongest in your thoughts, your emotional state, your habits, or the kind of challenge your mind has quietly been trying to organize. The key is to avoid turning this into analysis too early. If you begin comparing meanings, guessing symbolism, or trying to choose what sounds most flattering, you move away from the very reaction that makes the exercise useful. The first instinct matters precisely because it appears before self-editing. It arrives before you decide what answer seems correct. Sometimes an image attracts because it resembles how you already move through the world. At other times, the attraction appears because a certain quality feels needed right now. A person under pressure may notice one symbol more strongly than usual. Someone entering a period of change may immediately feel pulled elsewhere. Another person may discover that what stands out today would not have stood out a month ago. That is why these small choices can feel unexpectedly personal. Think of this less as a test and more as a mirror that only captures one angle of the present moment. No insect here defines you completely. Each represents only a possible emphasis, a temporary lens through which your attention is speaking. And because inner priorities shift over time, the meaning of what you choose can also shift with experience, stress, growth, or reflection. The important thing is honesty in the very first second. Before explanation, before interpretation, before deciding what should matter, simply notice what naturally calls you. Often the mind reveals itself most clearly when it is not trying to perform. In the next step, do not search for meaning yet. Just look, pause, and allow one image to arrive first in your awareness. That first quiet pull is the only thing you need. Now imagine the 4 insects placed in front of you at the same time. Do not rush, but also do not overthink. Let your eyes move naturally and notice where they stop first. One of them will usually hold your attention a little longer than the others, even if you cannot explain why. Try not to choose based on beauty, fear, rarity, or what you think the symbol should mean. The goal is not to select the insect that seems most admirable or most unusual. It is simply to notice which one creates the earliest spark of attention, the one that feels immediate before comparison begins. Sometimes the first choice appears almost instantly. Other times, your eyes return twice to the same image before you realize that your attention has already decided. That subtle return often matters more than conscious reasoning, because instinct tends to repeat itself before language catches up. If you feel uncertain, ask yourself a simpler question. Which insect feels hardest to ignore right now? Not which one you like most, but which one quietly pulls your focus without effort. Once you have your choice, keep it in mind. Stay with the first answer rather than changing it after hearing meanings. What matters here is the original response, because that first reaction often reflects the inner tone that is active in this moment. You may have chosen the butterfly, the beetle, the praying mantis, or the bee. Each one suggests a different emotional direction, a different way of meeting life, pressure, uncertainty, or purpose. Hold your choice clearly now, because the meaning begins there. If the butterfly was the first insect that drew your attention, this often suggests that some part of you is closely connected to transition, whether that transition is visible to others or happening quietly beneath the surface. Butterflies are often associated with beauty. But what makes them symbolically powerful is not their appearance alone. It is the fact that their most recognizable form comes only after a long period of hidden change, where what existed before must loosen, dissolve, and reorganize before something new becomes possible. That symbolism may reflect a person who rarely remains internally unchanged for long. Even when your outer life appears stable, your inner world may constantly be adjusting, questioning, releasing, and rebuilding. You may notice that certain identities no longer fit you after a period of time, even identities that once felt safe. Ideas, goals, emotional attachments, or expectations can begin to feel too narrow once you sense that growth is asking for movement. Because of this, you may be someone who experiences life in chapters rather than in one continuous line. A phase begins, teaches something, becomes too small, and then another phase calls for a different version of yourself. Sometimes you welcome that process. Other times it arrives before you feel prepared, forcing emotional adaptation before certainty appears. This often creates a particular sensitivity. People drawn to the butterfly frequently notice subtle changes in atmosphere, tone, and emotional energy long before others mention them. A slight shift in how someone speaks, a change in mood inside a room, an unspoken hesitation in a conversation. These details may register quickly for you. That sensitivity can become empathy, creativity, intuition, and emotional depth, because you are often aware of layers that remain invisible in ordinary interaction. Yet sensitivity also carries a challenge. When you feel deeply, transitions can become exhausting even when they are necessary. You may want growth and fear it at the same time. Part of you may long for freedom, while another part quietly wishes for something steady enough that change can pause for a while. This creates moments where you move toward new possibilities while still grieving what is being left behind. There can also be a tendency to escape discomfort by imagining the next version of life too quickly. When uncertainty becomes heavy, the mind may look ahead toward reinvention instead of remaining present with what still needs understanding. New ideas can feel safer than unfinished emotions. New beginnings can seem easier than sitting inside ambiguity. The butterfly often appears when inner development is already underway, even if no clear result is visible yet. What feels unfinished now may simply be part of a longer unfolding. Not every transformation needs immediate clarity, and not every pause means progress has stopped. The deeper lesson here may be that growth does not only happen in movement. Sometimes it also happens in stillness, in allowing one stage to settle before rushing toward the next. Wings appear through process, not impatience. If this was your choice, you may already sense that something in your life is changing shape, and even if the final form is unclear, your instinct may already recognize that change is asking to be trusted. If the beetle was the insect that caught your attention first, this often points toward a personality that relates strongly to endurance, inner structure, and the ability to keep moving even when progress is slow or unnoticed. Unlike symbols that immediately suggest transformation or lightness, the beetle carries a different emotional tone: steadiness, protection, and persistence through conditions that do not always feel easy. There is something ancient about the beetle as a symbol. It does not rely on speed, display, or dramatic movement. It advances with a kind of practical certainty, protected by its own structure, adapting through durability rather than visibility. People drawn to this image often recognize, consciously or not, the value of carrying responsibility without needing constant recognition for it. This may describe someone who has learned early that stability matters. You may naturally think in terms of what must be maintained, completed, protected, or held together. Even when others become uncertain, distracted, or inconsistent, you often continue because stopping feels less natural than enduring. There can be a quiet discipline in how you approach commitments, one that does not always announce itself, but becomes visible over time through reliability. Others may experience you as dependable because you often continue where many would pause. When difficulties appear, your instinct may not be to retreat or dramatize the moment, but to absorb pressure and search for the next workable step. You may not always speak immediately about what feels heavy, yet you often keep carrying what needs carrying. This creates real strength. Long-term effort, patience with repetition, and the ability to remain committed even when rewards are delayed are qualities often linked to this choice. You may understand deeply that meaningful outcomes are rarely built through sudden intensity alone. They often come through consistency repeated quietly over long periods. At the same time, strength built this way can slowly become armor. When someone becomes skilled at enduring, it can feel unnatural to ask for softness, assistance, or emotional space. You may sometimes assume that because you can handle weight, you should continue handling it alone. Vulnerability may seem inefficient, uncomfortable, or unnecessary, especially if self-reliance has protected you in the past. The difficulty is that carrying too much without expression can create invisible pressure. From the outside, you may appear composed, but internally fatigue can accumulate long before it is acknowledged. There may also be moments when change feels harder than expected, not because growth is unwanted, but because you have invested so much energy building something solid that altering it feels risky. People drawn to the beetle can sometimes remain loyal even to structures that no longer fit, simply because letting go feels uncertain. A familiar burden may feel safer than an unfamiliar freedom. Yet resilience becomes most powerful when it includes flexibility, not only resistance. The deeper lesson here may be that true strength is not measured only by how much you can carry, but also by knowing when protection needs softness, when effort needs pause, and when stability must allow adaptation. If this was your choice, there may already be an active part of you that values durability over display, but life may also be asking whether all the weight you hold still belongs entirely to you. If the praying mantis was the image that drew your eyes first, this often reflects an inner preference for awareness, timing, and measured response. Among these four insects, the mantis carries perhaps the quietest energy, yet also one of the most focused. It rarely suggests urgency. Instead, it represents attention held with precision, as though movement matters most when it happens at exactly the right moment. People drawn to this symbol are often highly observant, sometimes more than they openly reveal. You may notice patterns in conversations, shifts in behavior, subtle contradictions, or emotional signals that others miss because they move too quickly past them. There is often a habit of reading beyond words, sensing what is implied rather than only what is stated. This can create a calm outer presence. Even when much is happening internally, you may prefer to watch before responding, gathering enough clarity before deciding what deserves action. Impulsive environments may feel draining because they demand immediate reaction before understanding has fully formed. You may naturally trust reflection more than speed. That tendency often becomes a quiet form of intelligence. Rather than pushing yourself into every situation, you may instinctively wait until something feels meaningful, useful, or sufficiently clear. In difficult moments, this can be a major strength. While others react emotionally, you may create distance just long enough to choose carefully. That ability can make you appear composed, strategic, and emotionally self-regulated. There is also often a strong relationship with inner control. You may value keeping thoughts organized, reactions measured, and emotions contained until they can be understood privately. This does not mean feelings are absent. Often it means they are processed inwardly before they are shared. For others, your calm may feel reassuring because you rarely add chaos when a situation already contains enough of it. Yet every strength has a shadow when overused. The same caution that protects clarity can slowly become distance. Sometimes observation replaces participation. Instead of entering uncertain emotional territory, you may remain mentally present but inwardly guarded, as though staying slightly outside experience feels safer than fully entering it. This can make closeness difficult at times. When control becomes too important, spontaneity may feel uncomfortable, and emotional openness may seem unpredictable in ways that are hard to trust. You may wait for the right moment to speak, the right condition to act, the right certainty before moving, only to realize that some meaningful moments pass while still being evaluated. There can also be hidden fatigue in always staying internally alert. Constant awareness sometimes means the mind rarely fully relaxes because it continues scanning for signals even when no decision is needed. Precision then becomes pressure rather than wisdom. The deeper lesson of the mantis may be that timing matters, but not every valuable moment arrives fully prepared. Some experiences only reveal meaning after participation begins. Patience is powerful. but life sometimes asks for presence before certainty. If this was your choice, your instinct may currently value clarity, restraint, and intelligent waiting. Yet there may also be an invitation to trust that not everything meaningful can be understood before it is lived. If the bee was the insect that immediately drew your attention, this often reflects a strong connection to usefulness, rhythm, and the feeling that life becomes meaningful when effort moves toward something tangible. Among these symbols, the bee carries an energy of directed action. It rarely moves without purpose. Even its smallest movement suggests intention, coordination, and an awareness that every task belongs to something larger than the moment itself. People who feel drawn to the bee often have a natural relationship with responsibility. You may feel most settled when there is something clear to contribute, something to improve, organize, complete, or support. Even when you are tired, unfinished obligations can remain mentally present because part of you finds stability in knowing what must be done. This often creates reliability that others quickly notice. You may be the person who remembers details, keeps commitments, responds when needed, or quietly maintains systems that others depend on more than they realize. There is often satisfaction in seeing effort become visible results, not necessarily because recognition is needed, but because movement itself creates reassurance. The bee also suggests a mind that understands structure. Routine may feel comforting, not because life should be rigid, but because rhythm creates clarity. When many things become uncertain, returning to tasks, goals, and practical responsibilities may help restore inner balance. Action can feel easier than staying too long in abstract emotional uncertainty. At your best, this creates remarkable consistency. You may know how to generate momentum even when motivation is low. While others wait for ideal conditions, you often begin anyway, trusting that discipline carries energy forward. That quality can build long-term achievement because you understand that many important outcomes are formed through repeated effort rather than dramatic bursts of inspiration. Yet purpose can slowly become pressure when identity attaches too tightly to productivity. If usefulness becomes the main measure of worth, rest may begin to feel uncomfortable rather than restorative. Pausing can seem undeserved, as though value disappears when visible output stops. Even silence may feel like something that should quickly become productive. There is also a subtle risk of losing personal direction while serving expectations. The more capable a person becomes, the more easily others rely on that capability. Over time, you may continue responding to what is needed without always asking whether your own energy still agrees with the pace. Duty can become so familiar that personal desire grows quieter in the background. For some, this creates hidden exhaustion. The outside remains active, organized, dependable, while internally there is less room for softness, spontaneity, or reflection without purpose. When every day becomes a sequence of necessary tasks, even meaningful effort can begin to feel heavier than before. The deeper lesson of the bee may be that contribution matters most when it remains connected to vitality rather than depletion. Work has value, service has value, discipline has value. But none of these replace the need to occasionally step back and ask whether your own inner world is receiving the same care you give outwardly. If this was your choice, your instinct may currently be aligned with direction, commitment, and purposeful movement, while also quietly reminding you that worth is not measured only by what you produce. Now that you have explored the meaning behind your choice, the most important part is not deciding whether every detail fits perfectly, but noticing which ideas created an inner reaction. Sometimes one sentence feels immediately true, while another feels distant, and that contrast itself can be revealing. Reflection often begins not when a symbol explains everything, but when one small part of it quietly stays in the mind longer than expected. No single insect can describe a whole person. Human experience is always more layered than one image, one tendency, or one symbolic reading. What this choice may reflect is simply the quality that feels most active in you right now, the emotional direction your attention recognized before conscious thought stepped in. At one stage of life, someone may feel deeply connected to the butterfly because everything internally is changing. Later, the same person may choose the beetle because endurance becomes more important than reinvention. In another season, patience may become necessary, and the mantis suddenly feels familiar. At another moment, action and responsibility may dominate, making the bee impossible to ignore. That is why these symbols are most useful when understood as temporary mirrors, rather than permanent definitions. We all carry different responses within us: the need to transform, the ability to endure, the instinct to observe, and the desire to contribute. What changes is which one rises to the surface when life asks something specific from us. Sometimes your first choice reflects what already feels strong. Sometimes it points toward what is missing and quietly needed. Both possibilities matter, because attention often moves toward what the inner world is trying to organize, strengthen, or understand. What makes the first instinct meaningful is that it usually appears before self-description begins. Before you decide how you should appear, something in you has already responded honestly. That small reaction may not define you, but it often deserves to be noticed. So now I'm curious. Which insect did you choose first? The butterfly, the beetle, the praying mantis, or the bee? And did the meaning feel close to what you are experiencing lately? Leave your choice in the comments, and if one part stood out strongly, mention that too. Sometimes reading how others interpret the same symbol reveals how differently one image can speak to different lives. Because in the end, the goal is not to label yourself, but to keep observing the quiet patterns that appear before words do. That is often where self-understanding begins.